This is Sam Morril, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
Thank you once again for tuning in to the Matt Balaker podcast. I want to encourage everyone out there to like, subscribe, and make sure all your friends and casual acquaintances do the same thing. Ever since we released the book, Greg Giraldo, A Comedian's Story, and if you haven't bought it, please do. I get asked the question, who do you think is the next Greg Giraldo? And while I don't think there'll ever be an exact replica, one of the torchbearers for the new generation is today's guest. He's fantastic. So I strongly recommend, if he's in town, don't go to Benihana's. Take your wife, take your girlfriend. You got to see this guy. He's that good. In February of 2020, he released his third stand-up special for Comedy Central titled I Got This. He's been all over television. Conan O'Brien, Stephen Colbert, America's Got Talent. He knows what it's like to walk through life as a 6'3" male with great hair. Please join me in welcoming
Sam. Now I know this is bullshit. No one has ever told me I have great hair.
Sam Morril to the podcast. How you doing,
Sam? Hey, man. Well, first off, the book is great, man. You did a great job with the book. And no one will ever, carry Greg's torch because he was such an original and so unique. But he's definitely, he was like a true New York comic. He was brilliant. He was a great joke writer who, you kind of knew who he was, but he always led with a joke, which I always loved about Greg. And, I think he inspired not just me, but a whole class of the next wave of comics.
Yeah, I think comedy is in a good place. Like, obviously, I look at you and Mark Normand, and there's so many talented comics out there. But you're young right now. So when Greg passed in 2010, you were not quite a baby, but you were 20 something.
I remember where I was when Greg passed. I was on a shitty road gig, and I just started crying. I loved Greg. I didn't know him. I met him, I think, twice quickly and just told him I was a big fan of his. But I was so just rooting for him because I thought he was so cool. And, he combined everything I loved about comedy, where he could he could be open, he could be vulnerable, he could be just mean, he could be hilarious. He was like everything. He got a sense of what a person he was from his stand-up. So, I had, when I thought of New York comics, it was it was Attell, it was Greg Giraldo, it was Colin Quinn, Patrice O'Neill. That was New York comedy to me.
I was a huge fan. I am a huge fan of the Comedy Cellar, but if I had to point to one program that I loved more than any, it would be Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn. And I think it kind of encapsulated the New York scene at the time. I'm curious, Sam, what was your first exposure to Greg Giraldo as a comedian?
That's a good question. It must have been, I don't know, but it must have been his half hour where, that one where he looks super young and
Good Day to Cross the River, I think.
Yeah, I think that was it. And I think he did. He had so many good bits in that half hour. I remember being like, wow, this guy's, see, it's something about him I love. And something I also love about David Tell is they have edge in their act because that's who they are, but they could have both been great, clean comics. It's not like they're filthy ever for for any reason other than that the joke called for it. So I love that about Greg is this dude could belt out a great late night set, but then he could also be the best on the roast.
That's a good point. A lot of people know him as the guy from the roasts. And to some, that's kind of controversial because that's not at all everything he was. But you got to admit,
he was great at it.
His roasts were genius.
Yeah, but I think the diehard fans of Greg, which I would consider myself one, is that there was so much more to him. He was a master at roast. There's no question. When you watch him, he's the guy I was pumped for. He was the guy I was I want to see what Greg does. But yeah, I mean, there was so much more there. So to reduce him to that, I think is like, I remember, I think it was New York Times did an obituary. They were like insult comic. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's a fucking insult because
Yeah.
there was so much more there, you know?
It's a slap in the face. Now, were
Yeah.
there, you mentioned you met him twice. I did too.
Yeah.
What was your interaction with him when you met him?
I went to see a show at Comics, RIP. They still owe me money, pieces of shit.
Pay up, Comics, pay up.
Yeah, we did Comics, and me and my friend Dan, who actually bartends at the Cellar now, and he's a guy I grew up with, and we were big fans of Greg. It was a great lineup. It was like Tom Papa was on it, and Bobby Kelly, like a lot of great New York comics. But it was a long time ago. And I think Ray Allen was hosting it. And I knew Ray a little bit because, I was doing stand-up. So he knew me, and Ray was like, I know you're a big Greg fan. Do you want to meet him? I was like, really? I don't want to annoy him, obviously. I'm a fan. And we just chat for a minute, and he goes, Greg, it was one of those sets where he crushed. He got a standing fucking ovation. It was a lot of diehard fans. He was closing on that happy birthday bit,
Yeah.
That joke where it's like, how old are you now? That bit where you're like, dude, I've never seen
how much food can you shove down your esophagus?
No, not that one. The one about like they have the illegal immigrants come out and sing the happy birthday for you. Like I'm the one, come swimming. That joke, and that one's a great one too. You mentioned, but he did that, and dude, murdered. And at one point in the set, he goes, I feel like I've like disappointed you. And I was like, what? Like, this is the hardest I've laughed. Like, this was cathartic. I feel amazing right now. And he goes, I feel like I've disappointed you, to the crowd. And we were all like, no, what? It was like something in him that was like, it's like, I always say, like, as a comic, you want a hint of self-loathing, but Greg had way more than a hint. And, you need a little bit. No, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, we all, on some level, have a little hatred, but like you want just a little, because you see the comics who walk around and and you can tell the ones who love themselves, and you're like, your act fucking stinks. I mean, you need enough, because I'll go up now, I just burned an hour, and I took a fucking nice little bomb on Monday night trying all new shit, and it felt great. Like I was one of the things where I was like, oh dude, you need a little of this like fucking pain. It's like you need a little of that masochism in you to write a new act, because if you're up there and you're killing all the time, you either see those people that are like, yeah, I'm a fucking murderer, or those people who like, I'm an alcoholic because I'm sick of these fucking jokes and I don't want to think about it,
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. I mean, you need some pain. And one thing I admire about you and also Giraldo is just how prolific you guys are at writing. I mean, you could do the same 20 minutes over and over and get booked, but you don't do that. Like, what is it in you?
Don't grow. You don't grow in any way. I mean, you don't grow as a comic, and you don't grow. You don't get new fans unless you're putting new shit out. So, I mean, I've said this a bunch, but like the reason my class of comics is that way is because of guys like Greg and Attell and Colin, and guys who like keep, and and Louis and then before him Carlin, guys who kept burning it out. That's why we're that way, because you are what your culture is. It's almost like they're the vets on a team and we're like rookies, and we're like, oh, how do you work out, and they say, well, you got to go this hard, and you're kind of like, oh, I got into this because I wanted to drink. I didn't know I had to I thought I could like skate by and drink for free. I didn't realize I had to have the work ethic of like fucking LeBron, like I didn't realize this was like a ridiculous. I mean, I got good at this talking about my dick in a taco bar or whatever, and then they're like, you have to write 3 hours a day, make sure to exercise, because it's about your mentality, and you have to stay. I mean, you do realize, like, if you hit like an elliptical on the road or something, or whatever you're doing, you're like, yeah, just get that so you don't go crazy. I mean, I'm in Tampa right now, so you just have to, like, the place everyone wants to be in June, Tampa, Florida. But I do. The crowds here are actually, it's funny. They're actually excellent. This is a great club.
I like this. They're actually excellent. Like, you're surprised. Yeah. Tampa's
Florida's a mixed bag. I talk about how Naples is the worst weekend of my life a lot on stage. Orlando is like hit or miss. Miami is like a cool city, but cool cities can be tough comedy crowds, you know, because they show up like 20 minutes late and I'm below. So you're like, all right, well, the show is.
They've got too many options. A town with that many supermodels isn't always great for comedy.
Yeah, if you look in the crowd, you see a hot crowd. If they're like, look, if there's some good-looking people mixed in, fine. But if they're hot, you're kind of like, why are you listening to me? Like, you wouldn't listen to me at a bar. Why are you listening to me on a stage?
You've got orgies to attend or something. Why are you here?
Exactly. They got something else to do.
So where did you grow up, Sam?
I grew up in Manhattan originally, and Chelsea, and then Upper East Side, and went to a boys' school called Browning on the Upper East Side, and left for a year to go to college at Tulane. Katrina hits.
Okay.
I was already doing stand-up. I started at 18. I was already.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're a baby. I mean, if you're living in Manhattan, you have a lot of options. What inspired you? I'm gonna go tell dick jokes on stage.
Well, I got very lucky because I went to the comic strip originally. I was too scared to go to the cellar because I knew what it represented, and I knew I didn't want to show my face there, and I was too nervous to ever. That's the thing about New York, is everyone talks about, like, you know, starting in New York, but you also don't want to be seen too early. I always thought so.
Yeah,
I don't want people to see me when I'm bad, because then I was scared they'd always think you know you're not good out of the gate, and you don't want people to remember that you're not good.
Right.
So. But then if you come from another city, you're like this big fish in a small pond. Then you come to New York, maybe you impress people. Maybe they're like, yeah, you're still not that great. So no matter what, I was kind of like, what's the move? So I remember going to Tulane for like a year, and Katrina hits, and they were kind of like, all right, you can go to any school you want right now. Basically every college in the
they're like, oh, we feel sorry for you. You're like, SAT scores,
yeah,
you damned.
We're kind of like America's sweethearts. So
yeah.
I went back to New York. I went to Columbia for like one term. I just started doing a lot of stand-up. I was like handing out flyers everywhere on the street, like barking people in. Sometimes they give me money. Sometimes they'd be like, you can go on. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I love this. This is awesome. Even when it was bad, it was like, oh, this is cool. I want to be like, I want to be a comic. It's when I was like really young, I think I wanted to be more like a comic actor, but then I just became obsessed with stand-up. And I think a lot of the ways you become obsessed is by listening to, I think it was like LimeWire or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
You could just rip like Greg's special off, you know, because that was back in the day where, well, back then you couldn't just like find shit on YouTube. So, or maybe you could find some stuff, but not everything. And now, you know, then it was like, we'd be like in school listening to Greg or listening to Attell or listening to, you know, Pryor or Rock or something, one of Chris Rock's, you know, and I was like, oh shit, you know, jokes, like hard jokes. And so I know I do it. And of course, like, it's such a fucked up thing, is like your friends kind of only support you in the beginning because because they're like, yeah, you're bad. I'm like, yeah, come back in like 6 years, I'll be better.
Right.
But you know, so you're doing that. I was handing out flyers for like years. I was doing it for a while because it was a great way. Because I hated I do open mics, but I hated them. I dreaded them every time. And I didn't really mind bombing. It was sitting through like 30 comics who were awful. It was like,
it's so depressing. I mean, we talk about that in the Giraldo book, but I mean, it's like therapy for people that can't afford professional help.
Yeah. And I hated it. I mean, I met some of my best friends there. Like I met Mark Norman at open mics. I met some of my closest friends to this day and comics who went on to be great comics at those mics. But I also found them to be cliquey, and I hated that. I really hated that because I was just there to do the work, and I found a lot of comics would, they would like go up and do inside jokes and shit on each other, and I'm like, they're giving you 3 minutes, and Mark would always say, like, I can't tweak at open mics, and that kind of annoyed me, you know, because Mark is so meticulous. Every word matters so much. And I felt like the same way with my jokes. Like if one word was missing, it wasn't going to work. So yeah, I hated mics. I liked going up I'd rather bomb for strangers. And like, I didn't want comics to see me weak. I didn't like the idea of like, I think this is crazy that you hone your skills in front of your peers. I hated that. And
none of, I mean, you'll make some friends, but by and large, they're not there to support you, or more importantly, they're not even paying attention. They're looking at their own notes.
Gary Veter, who's one of my best friends, and like we do the road together like almost every week. He comes on the road with me. He's a great comic. I met him at an open mic at a taco shop, and he just saw me spacing out, and we were kids, and Gary was like, this fucking asshole's not paying attention. And like, that's how I met Gary. He just snapped at me on stage, and he was like, the next night I saw him at another show. I think it was my show. I had a show, and my co-host booked him, or my co-producer booked him. And he was like, hey, I'm sorry I did that. And I was like, yeah, I get, if you don't snap at mics, you're not doing mics, right?
Right.
Everyone has meltdowns, but Gary was, then we immediately became tight. But it's funny, a lot of those guys, you kind of like go your own way for a while, and then you reconnect like a couple of years later. Like I had a lot of comics like that where you're just kind of in the trenches, just kind of working doors or doing whatever you can to kind of get on or stay around the scene or be around comedy. And then you see them, and like that happened with Gary, where I didn't see him for like a couple of years, I feel like, and then we became like inseparable again.
Mm-hmm. So you're in Colombia. You're barking at people to come to your shows. You're doing open mics, and all this at a very young age. When was it where you essentially became professional? Like where this was your livelihood?
I got really lucky because I won a festival in Atlanta called Laughing Skull, and many people apply, and the prize was you get a year of road work, which I was like, there's no way they're going to make good in that. But they really hit up every club, and they're like, you have to book him. And I got really lucky because I don't think I deserved to win it. I think I should have probably come in second. But, I think this guy, Tom Simmons, had a better set than me. Uh-huh. And
you hear that, Tom? He has your back.
But I won that. That changed my life because I was able to tour. Some clubs would just like feature me, but I would really push to get opening for people I want. So I found like I at least would learn something. I remember like I got like Mark Maron, and like,
oh wow,
this is like a long time ago. Yeah. I was like a young comic. He was just becoming like he was just starting to kind of sell tickets in clubs. Okay. That's how long ago that was. I mean, WTF had just started, so it was so fucking long ago. But I respected him a lot. I knew he was a real comic. So I was like,
oh, and he had been working probably almost 20 years, or I don't know, decades before that even. Like he put in the time.
And I thought he was like the real deal. So I was pumped to work with him. It's funny. We met a couple times after. He's like, where do I know you from? And I'm like,
don't tell me.
Rooster T. Feathers.
And Sunnyvale.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well done. Yeah.
Thank you. I've been there.
And so we did that, and then, and then like B rooms would kind of headline me, and they'd pay me shit, but it was like, it was enough. And then I would do well enough where they'd be like, wow, you're better than we thought you'd be. And I'd be like, I mean, I had like maybe like a shitty 40, but I was baby face enough that I think like young people were like cool, and older people were like, oh, this is kind of adorable. That he's
a sweet boy. Yeah, we'll give him a shot.
Well, yeah, and then and I think me saying fucked up jokes with like, a baby face was they were kind of like, this is kind of funny. And
it's like a puppy cussing at you.
Well, some clubs were like, he's not ready, and other clubs were like, he's working hard. Like, I think it took you. The hard thing about that stretch was, though, I was playing a lot of bad clubs, and I was headlining, so it was like an amazing experience. But when you're playing for bad rooms at paper crowds and give out free tickets, you're getting people who had like nothing to do. You're not getting people who love comedy. You're getting people who are like, I have nothing to do. I'll go watch this guy.
They didn't want to go to the movies that night. Yeah.
Exactly. Like they don't have your back. So if you're not, and it's very hard to develop material when the whole crowd is like, prove it the whole show. So that's why a lot of people struggle to, I think, build a base, an audience, because when you're just always doing hell gigs, there's not really a moment to create new jokes or to try new jokes. They're just the whole time they're like, what? Or they're heckling you. They don't take you seriously. So you get good off the cuff. You get good at riffing with people, but your material almost gets worse. So I would have a shorter fuse because I was just used to getting hit. So then I'd be in the city and I would snap way too quickly on people, and they were kind of like, "What's this guy's problem?" And I was like, "Oh, sorry, I was just in fucking Warwick, Rhode Island, or whatever." You know, you're just in some place where like they're, you know, you're bombing. So you start kind of climbing the ranks. I started doing really well in festivals. Like festivals were like weirdly a place where I could shine because my jokes were short. So if they're like, you got to go up and kill in 1 minute, I would go up and kill in 1 minute, and they'd be like, wow, okay. And then there's like story guys who you could just leave in the dust because they're like, I need to set the picture. We would go on 1 versus 1. I would call it 8 Mile for Jews. And it was just like me versus you. We would just go at each other, and I'd always finish pretty well. So even if I lost, I'd get work, and that's how you kind of become like a city guy. Like I was a Caroline's comic strip guy. I wasn't like at the Cellar yet, but what's interesting is like everything leads to another thing. Like, you know, I won Laughing Skull, so then I remember, you know, I'd sell these dumb T-shirts after shows, and you know, but some weekends you make more in the T-shirts than you do the fucking jokes, which is hilarious. But then the worst is when you're pitching the T-shirt on stage, and then you say, and the joke bombs, and I go, I still got to pitch it. I brought the shirts, you know. So remember when you hated this joke on stage? Now you can own it on a T-shirt. And I remember opening for Gary Goldman. That was another one. There was like, I just wanted to work with comics, and I'm like, there's a good comic. I'll learn something. You picked, I'll learn how to control room.
Strong mentors, yeah.
Well, I remember Magoobies are like, I forgot, they were like, you'd open for this guy, and I was like, can I work with Gary Goldman if he's not bringing someone? And they said, I'll ask him, and he said, okay. I think like Gary and I had a mutual friend. I think Ryan Hamilton was our mutual friend at the time. Okay. Ryan's like, Sam is funny, and Gary's like, okay. So I remember I get off at Magoobies, fucking better club than it sounds. But I get off stage there, and my first set, Gary was like, "You're really good. I'm gonna wreck you at the Comedy Cellar." And I remember being like, I just want him to think I was okay. I was like, I just don't want him to think I'm a hack or something. Even at the time, I was like, he's not going to do that. And I remember being like a young road comic, just, you know, the pay is shit. So you're like, well, I'll get drunk for free. So I'm just pounding scotch or whiskey or whatever in the green room. And Gary's like, he's like, so I'm going to wreck you at the Cellar. In my head, he's like, I'm like, sure. I'll see when I believe it.
Yeah, we'll see.
He goes, all right. He goes, breakfast tomorrow, 9 a.m. And I was like, what? I was like, 9 a.m. He's like, yeah, you got to wake up to write. And I was like, I write, but I don't fucking wake up at 9. But that was like a wake up call. I'm like, oh, this dude's disciplined.
Yeah.
So we hang out. I'm like, Gary's very cool. And then like a month later, he's like, hey, are you free for the Cellar like on Friday? And I was kind of like, what? So none of my friends work there except for Dan Soder and Nikki Glazer. No one I know works there except those comics. You know, the Cellar now, the floodgates kind of opened up. A lot of people are past there. Maybe they don't get spots. There's 4 rooms now. Back then, there was just 1, right? Yeah. So I remember him being like, you're coming in. I was like, will you be there? He said, I'll be on the road. I'm like, fuck, I have no one. Like,
you have no security blanket.
No security blanket. I was so panicked. I did 3 laps around the block. I was like, fuck, I don't, you know, yeah, I don't know. So I finally walk in, and Nikki's there, and I'm kind of like, all right, I know Nikki. So we chat a little. She's like, she's being supportive. She's like, you're going to be great. She knows I'm nervous. Yeah. Keith Robinson, who I know is funny. Yeah. He starts shitting on me. He's like, look how nervous this guy is.
Yeah.
Just shitting on me. Everyone's laughing at me. I'm like, this is fucking brutal. In my head, I'm like, I better kill. So Keith brings me up. First joke hits, and I'm like, thank God. Then I riff. A riff gets a laugh. I'm like, all right, I'm loose. I start doing really well. Esty, the booker at the Cellar, is like she's like very funny, very good. And I'm in. I'm like, holy shit, I'm working the Comedy Cellar. This is like, your life changes overnight. Sure. You're like, even the way you like, just getting the Cellar, to this day, is probably the most nervous of anything I've ever done. Like in comedy, nothing comes close. It's the Comedy Cellar, right? It's,
Yeah.
you know that you're just going to be around, if you love comedy, you know, you're just going to be around a higher class of comic.
Sure.
And like, I get to watch Colin Quinn now. I get to like sit in the corner and watch Dave Attell. Like I didn't want to be there before I worked there.
You get to sit at the comedian's table.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty crazy, right? And then you'd be there and, you know, you just try to soak it up. You just try to, but then also you don't want to be too influenced by anyone. You want to go your own way, because if you sound like anyone else, you're not you. So you can't watch too much comedy. So early on, but I try not to watch too much now, because I don't want a joke to pop in my head that I'm like, this is someone else's thought. And if you watch a lot of comedy, you really can't help. I think that was, you know, some comics have had problems with that, but you really got to be careful.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when you're performing with people at the Cellar, I mean, that's like the highest echelon. How do you balance wanting to come up with new material versus honing stuff that's going to pay your bills when you go on the road?
That's a good point. I mean, I write much more on the road, probably. I mean, I think now I can work out at the Cellar a little more. I mean, because I was just in a place where I was killing there for months because I was really just playing the hits of my new shit. And now I burned all that. So I'm kind of like, all right, if I have a fucking 6.5 out of 10 set, it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it every time, but like, I got to grow. I write a lot on the road, but also, you know, these people are just, you want to mix it up, because the people that are seeing me on the road are fans of mine. So they have my back. You don't want to just be working at the new shit for people that already love you.
Right.
You want people who don't give a fuck about you to laugh at this too. It's why you tour with jokes. Like I'll do, you know, if I do a trans joke, I want it to kill in Portland and Tampa. I don't want it to just kill in one type of audience. So you know, you do your New York jokes. I definitely, when I started the Cellar, I think I worked out I was a little too cocky. I didn't realize how much you have to go up and kill as a new guy to just kind of prove your worth. And I would work out there occasionally, because, you know, you're going up at like midnight a lot of the times. You're like, who gives a fuck? I'll work out. But people still give a fuck. They still care. So, you know, I think that they flushed me out of there for a while, and that really hurt. But I remember my friends being like, how are you taking this as well as you're taking it? And I said, because I think I'm just you're so delusional when you start in stand-up. Like, I mean, think about what it takes to go up there and be like, I deserve a living at this. I deserve to make, like, you are crazy. So so like, it was to my benefit that I started so young, because I didn't know how stupid it was. And then I started, you know, when at the Cellar, I got flushed out. I had this other thing where I was like, it's going to do me no good to be negative and bitter. Yeah. What I'm going to do is I wasn't able to work out at the Cellar. I wasn't able to work on new shit. I'm going to do every shitty bar show, and I'll work out, and then I'll come back to the Cellar with a bunch of new good shit. And I feel like I did. And then when you go on the road, you're like, okay, now I have a new act. Now I see, I don't want to be doing the same shit. You don't want to be doing the same material at the Cellar, or you become one of those dudes who just is like, okay, well, I'm killing, but what's the end game? The end game is to have fans and to make a good living at this and to keep burning out hours. It's not just to go up and kill. So I think if you're rattled by being thrown out of the Cellar, like, I get it, but you gotta just say, hey, this could actually be a blessing, because now I get to really be me. I really get to do what I really set out to do, and then I come back and it'll be okay.
Yeah, I like what you just said there, Sam. You said, I want to be me. How would you contrast your comedy now versus, call it, 10, 12 years ago?
Well, it's a lot of, you look at like what got you into stand-up, and you're like, why am I the type of comic I am, right? Like, I'm sure a lot of my humor is from my mom, me saying something fucked up to my mom, my mom going, Sam, I mean, being like, okay, I guess that's the line, right? Like, that's the line, you know, because I wanted to make my mom laugh too, but, you know, you just offend your mom for years. You're just like butting heads with your mom. So a lot of that's like, okay, how far can I push it? What's the most fucked up thing I can say that everyone's going to laugh at? What's a way to push everyone away and then pull them back, you know? So I think when you're starting, you come out a little bit more like beating your chest. I remember being like class clown in high school and just pissing off every teacher. And then at one point you just kind of shift and your teacher starts laughing.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, oh,
that's
now
a milestone. That's a milestone. Yeah.
That's kind of what you're going for. And then you're kind of like, oh, I don't have to just be this way. I can get more people on board if I just take a deep breath. Like, you almost are showing off at a certain point for your friends. And I think like the way you're doing that for your classmates, you're almost doing that for the other comics at first. And that's why the open mics can set you back. Like the comics who just crush at mics, you're crushing for your friends. The crowd they're the teachers. You got to make the teachers laugh too. And I've always said, like, I don't think this is an art. I think I'm an entertainer. Like I never wanted to go up there with a huge ego. Like, this is my art.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I'm here.
I'm imparting knowledge on you.
No, oh my God, it's a kiss of death. So, I think you just have to, I think the change was really like, I saw what this was. I saw that this is something where you got to deliver. It's not just about you. You really got to deliver. And you learn that by being around great comics. I mean, I'd see how seriously, like, these comics would take their writing and would take their shows. And I'd be on the road with Dave Attell, and Dave would have a newspaper for the town now, and he'd have something funny to say about the city. And I'd be like, this is so cool. Like you're just like, you're learning what it takes to be a pro. So I think that's what it is. It's like, you're kind of like, I'm a huge sports guy. I love the NBA. So I just look at some of these guys who come in the league and they have a lot of raw athleticism, but they don't know how to shoot a basketball. I'm like, well, you want to just be able to dunk, or you want to be able to make a fucking shot,
Yeah.
So potential is great, but it's also, I've seen a lot of comics with huge potential who are maybe a little too naturally funny.
Yeah.
And then you don't feel that you have to do the work, because you're kind of like, well, I could figure it out, When
you talk about too naturally funny, I mean, I think that's insightful, because when we're setting up this podcast, I remember reaching out to you and you said something that resonated. You're like, well, I want to focus on writing. And I've talked to like a shitload of comics. I've rarely heard that. So can you talk to us about that? What is your writing process like?
Well, I love the road because there's like, there's less distractions in New York. I've always said this, I'm actually healthier on the road than I am in New York City, because I'm in New York City, childhood friends hit you up and they're like, meet me at this bar. In the road, I can kind of like, I can avoid strangers, Or I bring like, Gary on the road who doesn't drink, my camera guy, James, who I bring sometimes on the road, doesn't really drink. I'll have like one, but like, so that helps me, because I want to get fucked up. Like, that I get why comics want to get fucked up. You're kind of using your mind all day. You're kind of like in your head all day. You want to shut it off. Like, I know it's bad for you. I know alcohol is bad for the thing you need, your brain, but like, guess what? You're annoyed with your brain. Right. So you're trying to shut it off. I think what I meant with that was like, back in the day, look, there's benefits to being a comic now, for sure. Like Greg is a comic you talk about, deserved a much bigger audience than he had. And if there were podcasts when Greg was around, he would be huge, because he was so witty and so quick, and he was such a well-rounded thinker. Like you could see Greg, I could picture Greg on a sports podcast, on a political podcast, on anything. He was just such a well-rounded guy and so gifted off the cuff. Greg didn't have the audience he deserved. And I am, fortunate to have a growing audience because of all these podcasts. The problem is these podcasts burn you out. And I didn't get into this to be a fucking radio guy. I got into this to be a joke writer. So you get hit up to do all these podcasts and like, do my podcast. Dude, I got like 4 hours of creativity in me every day. And you're asking for like,
I don't want to waste it on you, Matt Balaker. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, so no, today's perfect. I'm on the road. I'm like, I need a fucking, but there are days when I'm like, this is the job. Like the job is to have a new hour. The thing, I've never, even like huge podcasts, you get off, you're like, that was cool. But I've never like, I get off like from a new joke, not from doing any podcast. Like I'm a comic. I'm not a radio guy. So like I do the podcast because you have to, and because they're fun. Like I do like meeting new people. I like talking to new people, but all this shit lives forever. All this shit is on the internet. I like the idea of people knowing me through my act, not people knowing every fucking minor detail about me. I don't like how much people know about me. I like to just go up there and do my act.
Like you said, you're an entertainer. You're not a philosopher where they need to know like you're about your childhood.
I didn't sign up to be like a reality star. I don't like this whole like. I want to be where people know so many things about my personal life, and I just kind of wanted to do jokes. I just wanted to be like, I like that you didn't know a ton about Eddie Murphy or Rodney Dangerfield. Like you were like, they're just funny.
Yeah.
And I also don't have the arrogance to think that the more people know about me, the more they're going to like me. I mean,
it might be the opposite. I don't want to see him anymore.
Oh, you do all these things. Like, where do you stand this political thing? Where do you do this? I'm like, cool. I don't think I'm like this voice of reason. I don't think I'm this voice that needs to be heard on every issue.
You would not survive in Northern California or California in general.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, now it's like content has overtaken quality, right? So now it's quantity. It's not quality. And, I didn't put my first album out until I was like 9 or 10 years in, or something like that. Like I want my shit to be good. So then you work hard on creating this quality, and then they're like, verbal diarrhea for 3 hours, go. So, I like writing. I like kind of having an idea of what I'm going to say on stage. And like, I riff a lot on stage, but that's for the crowd. That's like a moment. It's not all going out into the world. So I don't like how much, and I do think it's like literally every person has a podcast now. So it's like literally friends of mine I grew up with, and they're like, come do my podcast. I'm like, you're like an architect. What are you fucking, what are you talking about? Your podcast? They're
about redesigning homes. I'll add a lot of insight there. Well, one aspect where I think you and Giraldo are similar is in a fearlessness. And I think in a way it's harder to be brave now than it was when he came up. And I know you've dealt with some controversial bits. And how have those made you stronger? Like how have you developed your thick skin?
I can't imagine. I don't think of myself as fearless. I mean, I definitely have fear. I mean,
you're like, I'm a giant pussy, really. But
I'm a huge pussy, dude. Gaping hole. No, I will say, I just think I'm always more impressed by comics who are like high energy and like when I would start out and I'd see someone doing something like a character on stage at like an open mic, I'm like, that's fucking fearless. When they'd be doing some weird, I'd be doing, I almost felt like I was like bailed out by being a low energy guy, and it was less fearless because I would just like be like, I'm like, if you don't like it, whatever. I can kind of just like keep going. But those were the dudes who were doing something like completely wacky. I'm like, oh, that takes such balls to me. But I guess you're always more impressed by what you don't do. But I don't think, I guess the answer to what you're saying, I don't think I possess that fearlessness. I think I just keep doing comedy because it's just like I wouldn't know what else to do with myself. So if there is a thick skin, it's probably just from doing this too much and being more comic than human at this point, and never taking nights off and just always being on the road. So I don't even think it's a thick skin. I think I'm just kind of numb. I think I'm just more used to being a stand-up,
Hear that, young comics? Have no other marketable skills than telling jokes, and you'll be fine.
I have nothing else, and it's like you really. People were like, man, how do you have so many new jokes? I have nothing else in my life. I have like literally like I don't go on dates. I don't like I'm doing fucking nothing. So
don't be balanced. Well, you've been very generous with your time. I'd like to get your thoughts on what are you most optimistic about in the comedy world right now?
It's a good question. I think I'm optimistic that people can kind of create their own space, and that people like that there's probably more middle class opportunities for stand-ups than ever before. And I think that's really good for comedy, that you can like, look, the bad thing about that is you do have to be a little more business savvy. And a lot of the funniest people I know are complete fucking idiots when it comes to the business side of comedy. Like they're like, yeah, I'm funny. You think I learned how to format videos and stuff. So, that's bums me out that there's so many funny people I know who are like, oh, fuck. And I'm like, guys, just learn, believe me, I have the worst ADD on the planet. I'm so bad at this shit, but I just, like, this is necessary. It's so necessary to learn. So I'm optimistic that you can create, more people can have a career in this than ever before. So I think that's reason to be optimistic. I have said this. I think now that anyone can release a special, it does make it a little less special.
Right,
so
right.
There was something about, like, I do feel like I get hit up by a friend like every other day, like, hey, can you promote my special? And I'm like, my whole timeline on Twitter is like, hey, watch my friend's special. Hey, my other friend has a special. So there was something to be said, like back in the day when there were these gatekeepers and they had more power, you would have to submit a video that was good. And now every comic, like, people have never submit specials, you know, sometimes they're great on YouTube. I mean, look what, like, so many comics have done.
Like Joe This has a really good one. I mean, there's a lot of good YouTube specials out there.
He has two on YouTube that are amazing. Yeah, Joe is one of my favorite stand-ups ever. I love Joe. He's a guy that is maybe the most naturally funny person I've ever met in my life. Like, he is incapable of, he can't not be funny. He's one of those people. Like, he's just he's a dude that, like, I need to watch because I can't. I was at his taping, his new one, and I was just like, oh man, it's like he's got a silliness and a self-deprecation that's like, there's no one really like him. He's one of my favorite comics ever. I love him.
He's great. Well, how can people? You have the special coming out, Sam. Can you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, I just taped the new one in Chicago. I'm pleased with it. I think it's going to be good. And now back to the drawing board. Now it's like, all right, new jokes. Let's go. You know?
Well,
so you just feel you can't enjoy it for a second because you feel the pressure immediately. You're like, oh, all right.
You're like, it's in the can. We got to move on. Well, for people out there who want to see you, they want to give you money, they want to ensure that you never have to get a real job. Where can they learn more about you, Sam?
I mean, just YouTube, social media. I'm on the road every week. I'm literally never in the city anymore. I feel like, except a few days a week, but, Tampa this weekend, Cleveland, Houston, West Palm, Buffalo, San Jose, Pittsburgh, Dania Beach. Then I start a new tour in the fall. That's like every weekend I'm out, and I'm pumped for that one. A lot of fun cities, and I'll be everywhere. I'm going to hit every city, and it's how you build it back up.
Basically, if you live in America, you have no excuse to not see Sam Morril. Sam, you're one of the best. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
I love the book. It was really cool you did that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.